So everyone who at least is somewhat interested in Tolkien, like me, knows that he was a conservative. So I looked into politics of Star Wars, series that for me sits in the same space in my heart as Tolkien's world, and I realized that while Tolkien's Legendarium is right-wing, Lucas' movies are left-wing. Now before I tell you how do I came to this conclusion, we need to discuss several things that characterize these works. First is that they both have very clear view of what is good and what is evil. At least their originals had it LOTR and original trilogy. However, their prequels, the prequels, and Silmarillion include some more complicated morality, but still hold to the general good and evil dynamic. Both criticize authority and authoritarianism. However, LOTR holds more to traditional hierarchy, but that is for another part of the video. Also for Tolkien, when talking about LOTR and Hobbit, I will use clips and images from movies. Just remember I'm talking about books here. Cultural spectrum. Let's begin with Star Wars, because my opinion about Tolkien is more controversial. So let me start with this: both works don't have any stances on things like abortion or LGBT rights, but you probably already know this, so you know. Now back to Star Wars. Basically, yeah, it's left-wing. Like, look, Empire discriminated against non-humans, which is obviously critique of racism, and the entire point of moment where R2 and C-3PO are not let into Mos Eisley is not that droids don't drink, which is purely lore explanation, but critique of racial segregation in America.
Hey, we don't serve their kind here.
What?
Your droids, they'll have to wait outside. We don't want them here.
They must wait out by the speeder. We don't want any trouble.
I heartily agree with you, sir.
It showed system and state of the Republic in prequels as catastrophical and in need of reform, a thing generally associated with leftism. And you will say that Emperor reformed the Republic. Yes, but he used these traditional systems that needed reforms to do this.
In order to ensure the security and continuing stability, the Republic will be reorganized into the first galactic empire for a safe and secure society.
We can also find a need to reform in the Jedi Order, which allowed this thing to happen by its loyalty not to the people, but to the government of the Republic. And what I will say here is probably a stretch, but Jedi Order might be an allegory to the Catholic Church. Now, before you will turn off the video, let me explain. In the beginning, the Jedi Order was this glorious institution that fought the Sith to bring the balance to the Force at any cost, but it turned into this hierarchical political structure that saw its loyalty more with the Senate than with the people, which ultimately led to its downfall. And how that plays into the Catholic allegory? Well, when I said Catholic Church, I meant more Christianity, and also communism and democracy, and any other ideology. Because what brings them together is that they all started as this idea where everybody meant to be free and happy, but then turned into these political machines that didn't care about its actual values, but upholding the entity that claims to represent them and listening to some of these values as dogma that can't be broken. And the second one very right-wing if you ask me. Like for example, Qui-Gon didn't agree with the Council on several spiritual issues, so he wasn't let into it. Entire point of Anakin turning to dark side, or should I say, the right side, I should probably never do jokes, was that he didn't believe that Jedi would want to save Padme, because according to the code, he couldn't even be with her in the first place. So yeah, Star Wars is more left-wing. But also we can take some of its left points because listening to Force as traditional value was good, so kinda religious. Tolkien takes other center stance on cultural spectrum, as he was Christian, so he of course was on the right side of the spectrum. However, unlike Lewis, whose most famous work I don't like, he didn't scream "I'm a Christian" like a videotape that broke and repeated the same beat forever. One thing we have to understand about Tolkien's work is that in his mind he was writing about far past of humanity rather than some fictional world. So in his mind Eru Ilúvatar was God, and all characters listened or fought for Eru's vision, which means they literally fought for Christian God and his vision. He also wrote that Ilúvatar come to Earth and his birthday date marks the border between the seventh and the sixth ages, and that the end of Arda that he described is literal Armageddon. I know that Armageddon is a place, it just sounds cooler as an event. He very liked traditions and customs of different peoples, which he wrote about like, have you noticed that it isn't the one great empire of good fighting with Morgoth or Sauron? It's always coalition of different peoples from three races, all with different traditions, abilities, languages, and characteristics, with big divides even among the same races. The three peoples only fought each other from greed, which Tolkien was really critical of. And now it is time for the most controversial part of video. Was Tolkien racist? LOTR is about white glorious races and peoples from the West fighting against bad coalition of outright blacks and browns serving the Dark Lord from the East. So, it's your opinion. Like, I'm not saying that he was racist, although he could, but there is a reason why white supremacists and anti-Islamists really enjoy reading Tolkien. But I'm not sure, so I will leave that up to you. Now, remember when I mentioned that free peoples were always fighting in coalitions of cultures and peoples, let me come back to that point. Tolkien was very critical of colonialism. As I said, he enjoyed cultures and stuff. This is why I made historical and mythological symbolism of Numenor from Tolkien's perspective, brought to you by me. Numenor served as a symbol to a great colonial empire on an island. Yeah, Numenor was the British Empire, and Atlantis for a good measure. Numenor represented everything wrong about the British Empire in Tolkien's mind. It was a colonial, and in some cut versions industrial power, colonizing and destroying cultures of other peoples. And the Atlantis part was that it was sunk by Eru. Finally, we get to the Roman part, as he also didn't like it. Arnor and Gondor, the two kingdoms made from one eastern, second western, with western soon falling and eastern surviving, but being very weakened by its enemies. And now it's time for the next argument for Tolkien being racist, and that is that he literally said that Middle Earth is Europe. So what could he mean by putting Haradrim here? Like, explain yourself. I mentioned that he didn't like the concept of an industrial revolution, which is true, and that's pretty right wings too, so denying progress. And now it's time for a conclusion of the cultural spectrum. So Lucas goes here. As you can see, I didn't want to put him too far left, as he probably isn't like some SJW warrior. Tolkien is right about here. He's more culturally right-wing than Lucas, left-wing mainly, because he was a Christian and wanted to preserve tradition of different cultures. Now it's time for the economic spectrum. So basically, as planned economy is more associated with the left, I'm gonna refer to it as economically left, despite being compatible with right-wing cultural stance. The same with market economy will be called economically right. So let's start from what both thought the same, and that is that industrialization and killing nature is bad. Tolkien is way more concerned about this, as best example is Scouring of the Shire, which entire point is not only emphasizing pacifism but also industrialization. Lucas showed Trade Federation destroying nature on Naboo as something bad, as well as Ewoks and Wookiees fighting with Empire and Confederacy, both also being that slavery is very bad. Lucas shows this by showing slavery on Tatooine in The Phantom Menace, which is also a critique of traditional systems that didn't do anything about it. Tolkien of course criticized slavery by having an entire culture of enslaved people as known serving the Dark Lord. So Lucas, yeah, he's a social democrat. Like, he says that he doesn't like capitalism and he loves democracy. So logical conclusion is that he is a social democrat. We can see that he criticizing market economy as the big corporations are the ones to join first to Confederacy, which is clearly headed by a Sith Lord, for their own corporate interest.
As I explained to you earlier, I am quite convinced that 10,000 more systems will rally to our cause with your support, gentlemen.
The Techno-Union Army is at your disposal, Count.
Their banking clan will sign your treaty.
Good, very good. Our friends from the Trade Federation have pledged their support, and when their battle droids are combined with yours, we shall have an army greater than any in the galaxy. The Jedi will be overwhelmed. The Republic will agree to any demands we make.
Also, he said that rebels in the originals were communist fighters in Vietnam, and the Empire was the United States, an empire with weapons of mass destruction and headed by old white racist people. And seemingly Disney didn't get it because now Empire and the New Order, sorry, Empire 2.0, has women, commanders, and officials. However, it doesn't have blacks and aliens, so at least this checks out. But correct me if I'm wrong. The critique of capitalism indicates that Lucas believes in strong checks and balances on the rich. He's also more keen on showing class conflict and wealth divide than Tolkien, with best example being Coruscant, planet in which the deeper you go, the poorer people become. Unlike Tolkien, where there is literally no class conflict, like when I think about class divides in Tolkien I can only think of Mordor and slaves Nuln, which is the only one with class divides. But in Star Wars, we've got the proletariat of farmers, aliens, and working class rising against the white old racist bourgeoisie. You can't get more Marxist or lefty with that. Literally all three people throughout history, right wing, you're gonna have to trust me on this one, they are just right wing. So to sum it up, economic spectrum, I would put Lucas here, still pretty left wing but not full blown planned economy, and Tolkien here, really right wing and capitalist. And finally, it is time for the last, the authority spectrum, with totalitarianism being on the one side and anarchy and liberalism being on the other. So Star Wars has many critiques of authority. For example, the Emperor plotline. Emperor is one big critique of authority. He is a totalitarian despot that won his power through manipulating democratic institutions and populism. He grabbed all the power for himself, and this is portrayed as evil in Star Wars.
And the Jedi Rebellion has been foiled.
What's happened?
The Chancellor's been elaborating on a plot by the Jedi to overthrow the Senate.
and the remaining Jedi will be hunted down and defeated. The attempt on my life has left me scarred and deformed. But I assure you, my resolve has never been stronger. In order to ensure the security and continuing stability, the Republic will be reorganized into the first galactic empire for a safe and secure society.
Death Star is basically a representation of authority, a weapon to scare anyone off revolting, a big machine capable of destroying an entire planet. Yet even this is not able to warn Palpatine absolute power of the galaxy, and Rebellion still fights and defeats him twice. Lucas shows that ultimate authority, even the one that Sidious had over Vader, can be broken. He also loves democracy, showing it always as a goal to be headed towards rather than dictatorship. So he is a libertarian on the scale of authority.
Now, young Skywalker, you will die.
Now let's see what Tolkien thinks. Basically, Tolkien criticizes absolute authority that Sauron and Morgoth had over their subjects. However, what we should be asking is what kind of authority is allowed. And that is, you need to submit your will to Eru and listen to his plan for Arda. He also has kings and rulers and shows return of traditional line of dictators, to be something good and desirable, but I will take away some of these plus authority points because it was still a pseudo-medieval period. On authority level, Lucas lands here, like libertarian, but not too anarchist, and Tolkien here, still quite authoritarian because, he follows traditional hierarchies and stuff. So now it is time to put different peoples and countries from this world on a political spectrum. Let's start with Tolkien's Legendarium. The Free Peoples. They share views that we decided Tolkien shared, or just was seeing as good, which is the same, so I'm just stupid. Sauron and Morgoth. Let me start with this. There is a difference between Sauron and Morgoth, with Morgoth wanting to destroy everything, and Sauron and Saruman, by the way, control it. But they are still the same on the spectrum, so you know. They are what we discussed Tolkien saw as inherently evil, so this is also obvious. Now we get to non-major powers. Noldor, that went north. Yeah, so they are on the same economy as Free Peoples. Varanorians are on the same authority level, but Fingolfinians? Please help me with this. Are more liberal, as they didn't listen to what Fëanor told Fëanorians to do before he died, and they weren't bound by the oath, and both teams are more left-wing on cultural, although, just like Numenor, they invented valor-hating based nationalism, which is kinda right-wing, so I'm gonna separate for them nationalism and tradition. Kingsman Numenor, not including Parazon. Numenor is basically the same as Feanorians, with faithful being persecuted, valor hated upon, and nationalism on the rise. Isolated orcs/goblins, whatever you wanna call them, they are not on the cultural spectrum, mainly because they just don't care. They have small amount of authority and are economically far-right. The Shire. It is surprisingly the same as orcs, but only difference being that they are fully anarchist. Men serving Sauron. There is a difference between the ones serving Sauron, which are Easterlings, Haradrim, Umbar, and Khand, and Saruman, which are Dunlandings. These are the only bad guys that are culturally right because they served Sauron for like 6,000 years. We also don't know their economy, but authority-wise, they are between the Three Peoples and Sauron. Dunlandings. Same as Numenorians, but on authority level almost anarchist. Now it's time for Star Wars: Alliance to Restore the Republic. Basically, in Nord language, the rebels. They are way more liberal than the Empire because their entire command is basically a council of different rebel militias. Culturally, they are very left-wing, as they had many non-human species in their ranks and called for the reform of the old Republican system, and for the Jedi Order to remain separate from the institutions of the Republic. They are actually economically centrist, and I'm gonna say to you that my statement that Star Wars is pro-social democracy is still valid, because Lucas clearly hated capitalism. The Galactic Empire. The Galactic Empire is really high on authority spectrum, which is obvious. It is culturally right-wing and is discriminating against minorities. And if you will say that if you are right-wing, that doesn't mean that you are racist. And I agree, but it can, so shut the fuck up. And economically, it's kinda left of modern US. The Old Republic, it is economically, actually, now that I think about it, it is the same as the US. Confederacy of Independent States, I mean systems. It is really more liberal than the Union. Sorry, I meant the Republic, and I swear I will never do this joke again. It is also left-wing, because its ideas are progressive, but it's economically far-right, with the corporations basically halting its economy and having considerable political influence on their politics. The hot space. I'm tired, so economy, far-right, culture, also far-right, authority, authoritarian. So yeah, I don't know how to end this video. So goodbye.